like all games, innocent and happy. The human brain was gradually filled with such judgments and convictions, and in this tangled skein there arose ferment, strife, and lust for power. Not only utility and delight, but every kind of impulse took part in the struggle for "truths." The intellectual struggle became a business, an attraction, a calling, a duty, an honour. Cognizing and striving for the true finally arranged themselves as needs among other needs. From that moment, not only belief and conviction, but also examination, denial, distrust, and contradiction became forces. All "evil" instincts were subordinated to knowledge, were placed in its service, and acquired the prestige of the permitted, the honoured, the useful, and finally the appearance and innocence of the good. Knowledge thus became a portion of life itself, and as life it became a continually growing power, until finally the cognitions and those primeval fundamental errors clashed with each other, both as life, both as power, both in the same man. The thinker is now the being in whom the impulse to truth and those life-preserving errors wage their first conflict. Now that the impulse to truth has also proved itself to be a life-preserving power, in comparison with the importance of this conflict everything else is indifferent. The final question concerning the conditions of life is here raised, and the first attempt is here made to answer it by experiment. How far is truth susceptible of embodiment? That is the question. That is the experiment. 111. Origin of the Logical. Where has logic originated in men's heads? Undoubtedly out of the illogical, the domain of which must originally have been immense. But numberless beings who reasoned otherwise than we do at present perished, albeit that they may have come nearer to the truth than we. Whoever, for example, could not discern the "like" often enough with regard to food and with regard to animals dangerous to him, whoever therefore deduced too slowly, or was too circumspect in his deductions, had smaller probability of survival than he who in all similar things immediately divined the equality. The preponderating inclination, however, to deal with the similar as equal, an illogical inclination, for there is nothing equal in itself, first created the whole basis of logic. It was just so, in order that the conception of substance might originate, this being indispensable to logic, although in the strictest sense nothing actually corresponds to it, that for a long period the changing process in things had to be overlooked, and remained unperceived. The beings not seeing correctly had the advantage over those who saw everything "in flux." In itself every high degree of circumspection in conclusions, every sceptical inclination is a great danger to life. No living being would have been preserved unless the contrary inclination, to affirm rather than suspend judgment, to mistake and fabricate rather than wait, to assent rather than deny, to decide rather than be in the right, had been cultivated with extraordinary assiduity. The course of logical thought and reasoning in our modern brains corresponds to a process and struggles of impulses in which singly and in themselves are all very illogical and unjust. We experience usually only the result of the struggle, so rapidly and secretly does this primitive mechanism now operate in us. 112. Cause and Effect. We say it is, quote, explanation, unquote, but it is only in, quote, description, unquote, that we are in advance of the older stages of knowledge and science. We describe better. We explain just as little as our predecessors. We have discovered a manifold succession where the naive man and investigator of older cultures saw only two things, quote, cause, unquote, and, quote, effect, unquote. As it was said, we have perfected the conception of becoming, but have not got a knowledge about what is above and behind the conception. The series of, quote, causes, unquote, stands before us much more complete in every case. We conclude that this and that must first proceed in order that the other may follow, but we have not grasped anything thereby. The peculiarity, for example, in every chemical process seems a, quote, miracle, unquote. The same as before, just like all locomotion. Nobody has, quote, explained, unquote, impulse. How could we ever explain? We operate only with things which do not exist, with lines, surfaces, bodies, atoms, divisible times, divisible spaces. How can explanation be possible when we first make everything a conception, our conception? It is sufficient to regard science as the exactest humanising of things that is possible. We always learn to describe ourselves more accurately by describing things and their successions. Cause and effect. There is probably never any such duality. In fact, there is a continuum before us, from which we isolate a few portions. Just as we always observe a motion as isolated points, and therefore do not properly see it, but infer it, the abruptness with which many effects take place leads us into error. It is, however, only an abruptness for us. There is an infinite multitude of processes in that abrupt moment which escape us. An intellect which could see cause and effect as a continuum, which could see the flux of events not according to our mode of perception, as things arbitrarily separated and broken, would throw aside the conception of cause and effect, and would deny all conditionality. (113) The theory of poisons. So many things have to be united in order that scientific thinking may arise, and all the necessary powers must be devised, exercised, and fostered singly. In their isolation, however, they have very often had quite a different effect than at present. When they are confined within the limits of scientific thinking and kept mutually in check, they have operated as poisons, for example, the doubting impulse, the denying impulse, the waiting impulse, the collecting impulse, the disintegrating impulse. Many hecatombs of men were sacrificed ere these impulses learned to understand their juxtaposition and regard themselves as functions of one organising force in one man. And how far are we still from the point at which the artistic powers and the practical wisdom of life shall cooperate with scientific thinking, so that a higher organic system may be formed, in relation to which the scholar, the physician, the artist, and the lawgiver, as we know them at present, will seem sorry antiquities? 114. The extent of the moral. We construct a new picture, which we see immediately with the aid of all the old experiences which we have had, always according to the degree of our honesty and justice. The only events are moral events, even in the domain of sense perception. 115. The Four Errors. Man has been reared by his errors.